My name is Bill Kelly. I'm the executive producer for news at NET Television. This is a very unique event. For one thing, it's the first time that we've used this room and this technology for this type of an event at our new headquarters here at NET Television. This is part of the Sorensen Public Policy discussion series. Mr. Sorensen set up an endowment because he felt as if there weren't enough people, average Nebraskans, average Americans participating in the public process, and that people who were running for elected office and serving in elected office sometimes needed their own primer on issues and need a little bit of a boost as they headed off into elected office. This is part of this, in part to work with existing elected officials and to get the people not only here in the room but across the state who are listening with us a little more engaged in the public process, and hopefully encourage more people to participate, both as elected officials and as average citizens in the process. We have a really wonderful set of experts here to engage in a discussion this evening about rural economic development. And I will give you a heads up right now, it's not going to be much of an event unless you folks here and the people around the state are participating in the discussion as well. People outside the room can give us a call at 1-800-332-0265. The code is public policy, and there are going to be some folks there willing to take your questions, and they'll get us up to here at the front. First of all, I want to introduce the people who are here and at distant locations. You'll be able to see Doug Christensen and State Senator Ray Aguilar. We'll introduce them in just a moment. But the reason we're here today is with Dr. Rick Foster with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. He is the Vice President, excuse me, in charge of their rural development initiatives. And would just like to offer you the floor and let you offer some remarks to our audience about why this is such a vital issue to begin with.
Well, thank you, Bill. We at the Kellogg Foundation have long thought that rural communities were actually a basic fabric of our national society that has been somewhat forgotten. We believe that rural America is a national treasure. And if we don't do something to help preserve it and help nurture it, that it could be something that once lost is very, very difficult to attain again. We start looking at rural environments in this country as the place where virtually all of the location where virtually all of our food is produced, all the renewable energy exists, all the environment that we hold near and dear is located. It's 65 million people. And it's 65 million people who many times do not have the advocacy and the champions they need to have their issues both heard and acted upon by policymakers. So one of the things that we would like to make progress on is what are the healthcare needs, what are the educational issues, what's the economic development, what's the access to capital, what are those issues that rural Americans deserve to have as part of their portfolio, their profile, to be part of the mainstream of this country once again. When you stop and think about rural America, which many people don't stop to think about rural America, the public perception is either it's a utopia or it's a dystopia. And the utopia of it is that there's these pristine meadows that we all wander through against these wonderfully babbling brooks that bring us peace of mind. And we're there because, we're self-sufficient, we're independent, and by gosh, you really don't need our help because you've got each other and you've got this wonderful virtue. And then the dystopia is that rural people are not as smart as urban people, and that there's a meth lab around every corner, and that our youth are engaged in crime, they're engaged in drugs, which they are to a greater extent than any other segment of our population, and that our rural people are underemployed and sometimes unemployed, and therefore you don't deserve our help. And either way, the utopia or the dystopia says that you're outside of the policy framework that is needed to bring quality of life to the people in rural America. The Kellogg Foundation doesn't believe either one of those stories. We believe that rural America is an interdependent cog in this society and needs to be reconnected. And the way that we do that is looking at policy issues as well as capacity building across the country and certainly in states like Nebraska, it has a record for caring about rural environments. So, Bill, that's why we're interested.
Thank you. We want to head out to Kearney, where the Chancellor of the University of Nebraska at Kearney is one of our distinguished panel as well. Doug Christensen, in addition to setting up an academic institution that has made a real commitment to rural development issues, also brings a unique perspective as a former state senator who represented his constituency in his hometown of Minden, Nebraska, but also as Speaker of the Legislature, served in that office longer than any other senator who held that office as well. Doug, can you hear us?
We sure can, and welcome. We really appreciate the opportunity to be involved this evening, and look forward to some lively discussion.
I want to start with a question for each of you. So often, whenever a representative of any entity, but rural communities and rural interests come to elected officials, the very first question or the very first answer they get when an elected official says, "How can we help you?" The answer is frequently, "Well, you can give us a grant, you can give us some money." What other alternatives are there, and what other policy considerations should local officials have when they're looking to the state for guidance and help? What else is out there besides simple financial resources?
You want to start there, Ray, and I'll get on.
Okay, sure. I think I'll take a shot at that.
Already,
That's why he was Speaker. No, I think the obvious answer is the state, everyone knows, doesn't have this pot of money that they can just dole out upon request. But what we can do is work for incentives, give out different incentives, whereas they're providing something for the state as far as revenues, possibly that we can give them some incentives to lighten their load and increase opportunities for businesses to move into these areas and expand upon that.
Obviously joining us go ahead, Senator Ray Aguilar representing Grand Island. Go ahead, Chancellor.
Well, thank you. I think there's certainly a couple of things that can be necessary, and one of them is to make sure that you're invited to participate, and that not every program is geared or is located, is centered out of a central area, out of the state capital. The involvement throughout the state is very important, and the opportunity to participate is as important as anything else. But I think the other one is to have an interaction where numbers don't drive the definitions. In other words, not everything is gauged on what is the most efficient. There's certain numbers, it's a pro rata share. It's we're going to get more bang for our buck because there are more people here. You can't let numbers and policy decisions drive your definitions, which will form policy. And so it has nothing to do with money right up front. It has everything to do with how the policy discussion is framed.
Once again, for those of you at the sites around the state that are monitoring this, please give us a call at 1-800. That's 332-0265, and we can answer your questions. Also, for those of you here in the room, we'll be taking your questions in a minute, and you'll be able to just stand and ask them. Also joining us this evening.
You need to ask for public policy when you call that number.
And ask for public policy when you answer that number also. Also joining us this evening, Sandy Schofield. Sandy's also a former state legislator. And my, what an intimate gathering we have here today. Teleconferencing by candlelight. Sandy Schofield also has a legislative experience representing the constituents up around the Chadron area. Also still manages her own ranch and farm up there, but in her current role, she is the director of the Rural Initiative for the University of Nebraska. The university's, for lack of a better term, catch-all for the rural initiative, rural development initiatives that the University of Nebraska system is put together, and an effort to effectively coordinate those initiatives. A question for you right off the bat also, with your hat both as still a rancher, farm operator, manager. That is such a 24/7 job for so many people that manage farms, manage ranches, active in farming and ranching and the like. It's very difficult frequently to engage our more rural neighbors sometimes in the rural economic development efforts, get them to run for office, to engage them in these kinds of discussions just because they're so darn busy. How do you go about getting more farmers and ranchers actually into the process and get them to be a little more active in the community?
Well, I think typically farmers and ranchers have first turned to their organizations. Sometimes it's their commodity organization, sometimes it's a group like Farm Bureau. But you're right, I don't know for sure what percentage of farmers and ranchers even have the time sometimes to participate in those. One of the things that I think maybe we underutilize is the distance technology that we have available now. In the past, when gas was cheap and time wasn't as valuable, I think it was more reasonable to think that people would get in the car and drive. But as we're demonstrating here tonight, you don't need to do that. Doug Christensen and I can talk about issues that concern us via distance. And I think there are opportunities there to bring more people into the political process if we start to think about how do we do that using technology.
Dr. Foster, are you seeing more engagement using technology in rural areas that allow people to plug into the process?
Well, very definitely, very definitely. And we would agree that we think that the broadband, policies that reach into rural areas is going to be the key to a lot of the economic participation of rural communities themselves. The interesting thing is that we've got to find a way to reconnect rural America with mainstream society. We fly over it and we drive through it, but we don't stop. So something is going to have to be that connector that says, kids in rural communities can have every bit as good as an education as anyone else. It'll probably be delivered through technology. And health diagnosis and connection to a hospital here in Lincoln can happen through technology. So we can still have those same kinds of services, but it will actually be through technology, we believe, Bill. Well.
We want to encourage your participation. Are there any questions in the room? You can either submit them on cards or anybody would like to ask a question first? Yes, right here, Jeremy. And if you could stand up and talk a little loud. Our microphones in the room are good, but we want to be able to hear you and see you also.
I was just wondering, just the rural society, how they're kind of paralyzed due to the fact that the economy doesn't allow them to venture out and change good practices. What efforts are out there to make education available, like during the winter times when they're maybe have a little bit of free time? Is there anything out there that says, come to this extension education center during the winter and we can train you for a new crop in the spring? To set aside 3 or 4 acres for raising produce and stuff that you usually get from California or Florida, but now we need to do it locally because the price of gas makes it more expensive to get to Nebraska. Is there anything going on like that allows rural farmers to be freed up and to learn, and then eventually in the spring take a risk and go out and try something new?
So continuing education for producers, especially during the winter time.
Yeah.
Sandy, I would imagine you're familiar with that.
I think we're still seeing an awful lot of extension educators within driving distance of farmers put on programming, and certainly that's always timed at a time when farmers and ranchers can take advantage of it. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think we're probably underutilizing the technology that's available to sometimes deliver that right to a person's home, so that they can take part in that even if maybe they live 30, 50, 60 miles from wherever the extension educator might be located. We did a little experiment a couple of years ago that I think has potential, and lots of people are doing this. It's nothing. I'm not claiming it's unique, but we had a marketing professor here at the university who put together some programming for farmers and ranchers who are trying to do agritourism. Most of them had hunting or other kinds of operations, and they had expressed an interest through their extension educator in learning more about how to market, how to reach new people and bring them into their, one guy had a pheasant hunting operation. Another person had something they called rent-a-ranch. You could actually come in and stay on one of their properties that had extra buildings and so on. That was a pretty painless way for people to participate in that. Didn't require travel. And there are all kinds of other models. You may be familiar with something called New Skills that the university has initiated. And that uses what's called WebEx technology. You can actually access that at home, even if you have very slow internet access. If you got a telephone and a computer, you can take a wide array of primarily business offerings. And so technology really does open up all kinds of opportunities. And as much as it's being used, I think it's still underutilized.
Chancellor Christensen, is there an ongoing effort with UNK or the other higher education institutions that you're aware of to take continuing education off campus as often as possible?
Clearly, the new growth market for higher education is the non-traditional student. In Nebraska, we know that the number of high school seniors are going to be very constant for the next number of years. In rural Nebraska, we know that that number is going to drop dramatically between now and about 2014. So if we're paying attention to those numbers, continuing education, non-traditional students, the person who is homebound because or place-bound because they have a job all day, we need to find new and innovative ways to be able to allow them to continue their educations, change careers, enhance what they're doing, and we've been able to do that. That really has been a tremendous benefit to us. That's kept our enrollment numbers up. There's a demand out there. The real stumbling block for us is to develop a relevant curriculum to be able to deliver to people that's meaningful, and we also have to kind of get over that hurdle that people who are my age learn in different ways than our younger students do, and that's a matter of time.
Is there a role for the community college system in providing seasonal continuing education for producers that's perhaps not been tapped yet?
Clearly, the community colleges have a good opportunity and role here, and that's where I think you see, for example, UNK and the community colleges are probably a little more in step and can work together to do those things. But the community colleges are going to be more place-based. They're in places that we can't be all the time, and so there's going to be the need for some hands-on working. I think there's a good chance that they'll be changing their curriculum as well to change what the needs are of rural Nebraska, and the issue is, can you do that quick enough?
And if I can add to that, I'd like to also say the community college have a little more flexibility when it comes to changing programs, changing some of their offerings, and they can do so in a lot quicker hurry than maybe what a major university would have to go through.
Dr. Foster, that we've seen a pretty big cutback in extension over the past few years. Is there, first of all, has there been as much need for extension? And obviously there's still a belief in a lot of areas there is, but is the trend still going to be to consolidate extension? And are there other ways to look at how those services have been provided?
Well, I think trends nationwide has been to think about extension differently. And so to consolidate it, yes, to drop back on extension spending in some ways, but I think it's really about repackaging. The amount of extension people now who are looking at economic development in rural communities, community development, is unprecedented. It's more now than ever before, but it's caused us to shift out of some of the traditional kinds of programs that we normally think of extension. So I think it's like all of us. Time marches on and changes happen, and we have to think differently about the role that we play with the demands that are on our time and on our society. So I don't think that extension is outliving its usefulness at all. In fact, it may be coming into an era that says, you know, if you listen to what the people need, as one of Jeremy's comments was about small-scale agriculture, whether or not that's a viable business. Well, it could be if we would put the same efforts into it with both policy and market identification as we have in other ways. So, you know, maybe part of this whole extension piece is redefining. It probably is time that we redefine what we would expect of an extension service in this current venue, this current time.
Good question, Jeremy. Thank you. Yes, sir. Back there in the back.
Yes. My name is Larry Dix. I'm the executive director of the Nebraska Association of County Officials. More of a comment than a question, but when you talk about the extension service, there's a project going on within NACO, our acronym of NACO, that we are working with the extension service all across the state to develop some training and some education to take computer skills, computer training down into county government, courthouse by courthouse, to allow staff to be able to have an opportunity to gain that knowledge without having to go out and try to go through specialized education. So we're looking at ways to try to, if you will, reinvent the extension service that's out there, and it's being received very, very favorably. We're doing it in a number of counties across the state.
Thank you for joining us, Larry. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Joan Benjamin. I'm with the North Central Region Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, and we give out grants to farmers and ranchers who want to try sustainable agriculture projects on their farms. What I see is that these farmers and ranchers and others in the rural communities are extremely innovative. They're entrepreneurs, but they don't receive the kinds of incentives that industry receives to move into rural communities. And I was wondering, how can we offer them the kind of incentives and resources that we're giving to corporations and industries?
Dr. Foster, what's out there?
That's a great question, and it's one we've been working on in the Kellogg Foundation for some time. We believe that there needs to be a significant, what do I want to say, almost change in perspective about the economic systems that drive American agriculture. And one of them is that we need large-scale agriculture, obviously, for world trade and for generation of commodity production that feeds us all. But there's also a component that says that local, environmentally friendly agriculture is an economy of its own and deserves to have the policies around those kinds of production systems that large-scale agriculture also has. It's not a question of either or. It's a question of both and. We can have both because they're complementary. So when we stop to think about then what we can do, we can start looking at market identification. You know, what are the market differentiations for locally produced foods that doesn't have to travel around the world to get to your table, and adds both quality of life, nutrition for kids who need good nutrition to learn, and nutrition for people who need that for healthy lifestyles and to be healthy. How do we start thinking of those kinds of markets? So much of it is like, what institutions will pay a premium for quality food if it's part of a hospital regiment? What universities will offer fresh fruits and vegetables in their cafeterias that is grown locally if it enhances the ability of students to learn? What high school programs are able to really capitalize on locally grown foods that supplies a market, yet an incentive to learn by their kids? So it's a rethinking of the value of food in our economy and in our quality of life. It's got to be a broader one than simply we have a commodity to sell and someone either locally or overseas will pay X price for it, because we will never get beyond the crisis we have in markets and pricing and agriculture if we don't move beyond that whole thinking.
Sandy, I have to assume that the university has been deeply involved in sustainable agriculture.
Absolutely, and but I want to talk a bit to Joan specifically about her question about how do you, if I heard you right, you were saying how do you find more support for sustainable agriculture that might be comparable to the kinds of incentives that we give to industry. Is that right? And I think that there are a couple of things to think about that we build on Rick's comments. Elected officials decide ultimately where to put the money as far as what kinds of incentives to put out there. Rural people typically have not been very well organized, and plus we don't have the numbers sometimes, and so it's very important to have a focused voice and to come together and advocate for the kinds of things that we think are important. So I think the first thing that Sustainable Ag needs to do is to bring forward that coordinated voice, both at the state and the federal level, to ensure that that's where, trust me, and I think Senator Christensen would agree with me, and Senator Aguilar, if there are enough of your constituents to say, this is important, I want you to put some money behind it, money will go there. That is a bit more difficult challenge, frankly, for rural residents than it is for large industry. But I'm a firm believer that it can be done. And sometimes we have to battle the distance issues because we don't even get to talk to each other all of that often. But I think the other untapped resource is to build rural-urban coalitions. I think that urban people are interested in the kind of agriculture that you're interested in and the description that Dr. Foster gave. And I don't think that as rural people we have always seen urban people as allies. And if we all come together, and that just increases the numbers that can advocate for that kind of activity. So I think it's important that we start to look in ways to do that. In the past, the best lobbyists have been farm organizations, and they really know how to do that well. But I think we can take a page out of the book of some of the people that really know how to do that well and advocate for other areas that we want to see additional resources put behind.
We're beginning to get some questions in. If you're on one of our remote locations and you want to ask a question, it's 1-800-332-0265. Make sure you let them know that the code is public policy. Back.
I was raised in rural Nebraska, and currently I attend UNL. It's kind of hard for me to figure out how I can participate in policy, in politics when I return home. When the real big concern is just getting a job, kind of establishing myself as an adult in the community. Do you have any kind of advice for a person in my shoes?
Yes.
Next question.
You know, it is you going back to a rural community to embrace the economy that's there, the opportunities that's there, encourage others to be part of that economy that will make the difference. And that's a public policy statement in and of itself. You are returning and looking at the assets of the community and what's possible for you. Now, the trick will be now is what you do with that. I've always thought about how do you change a policy? How do you change a practice? Well, first of all, you are bold enough to step forward and say, I have an opinion. And the second piece is that you find someone that shares that opinion. And then the two of you find two others that share that opinion. And pretty soon it's a collective voice, which I totally agree with Sandy. We lack a collective voice in rural America. So if you value your career in rural America and want it to be successful and sustainable over time, you'll have to step up and say, I can do both. I can be active in my community, I can be active in my career, and I need to be active on behalf of my community. And it's that kind of civic participation that will make you a better person in your career as well as a better citizen in the community. That's what we need.
Senator Aguilar, Grand Island is holding its own on population. What's the best argument you could make to a young person to come back to Donovan, Wood River, Alda, some of those neighboring communities just outside of Grand Island?
Well, what we're doing in Grand Island is very specific as far as our chamber has different programs that keeps in touch with people that have moved away, and then when we get a new business that's probably in the field that they're in, you know, we make them aware of that and try to encourage them to come back. And you know, we just now started that program, but it's already shown to be successful, and I think that's the kind of things that the small cities would have to do as well, to try to encourage. The main thing, the first thing is to entice business to your area. You've got to get some companies and businesses built up so you have something to offer.
Are there sufficient, as a state legislator, are there sufficient incentives being offered small entrepreneurs to locate their businesses in communities, again, the size of Donovan, Wood River, or Alda?
I think so. I think if you look at what we did this year in LB 608, the tax credits start with just, first of all, a population of less than 15,000 in the county. Secondly, all they have to do is really offer 2 jobs and invest $125,000 in that company, and they would qualify for some tax credit. We tried to expand that so we could include the smaller cities.
Want to get to a couple of our questions from our outside locations. This is a very broad question, but a great one. I'll start with you again, Dr. Foster. If you could make one change in federal rural or ag policy, what would it be?
Well, thank you. I'll be bold. First of all, I would say that there is a great deal lacking in the current agricultural policy that really deals with rural America. In the current farm bill, there's it's a $160 to $90 billion bill that looks at not only the subsidies but also the feeding programs, the food stamps, WIC, et cetera. Many of those. $3 billion of it is earmarked rural. $3 billion for rural. And anytime what I tell my USDA colleagues is if you put 3 over 160 or 190, that's a really small number no matter what it is. That's a small fraction. So why would we bury rural economic development, rural infrastructure, care and maintenance in the Farm Bill? And so one of the things that I would, if I could be king for the day or for the decade, they may need that, I would look at a rural policy that put rural people first. And we looked at the appropriations of resources, the movement of resources through a rural lens. And as the first thought, not as the last thought or the afterthought. And let me give you an example if I might. We know today that across the country, a nationwide statistic is only 10% of the rural economy is derived from agriculture. Now it's higher in Nebraska, it's probably higher in Iowa, but it's less that than many other states. So if only 10% of the economy in rural America is derived from agriculture, why would we look at an agriculture bill to do the care and maintenance of 65 million rural people? Why wouldn't we think that the agriculture bill should take care of agriculture and a rural bill is needed to take care of rural America? So not to be disparaging about the Farm Bill, but to be optimistic about an opportunity to really look at rural issues from a rural lens and do the appropriate appropriations to take care of a decaying infrastructure that we all see in our towns and our cities and our counties. King for a day, I would have a parallel rural agenda that is high profile and sees the light of day.
Sandy, if you were, we've got the king, if you were queen for the next decade, what would be your federal policy change?
I'm so greedy, I don't think I could pick just one. I would concur with the points made. And I think the other areas that I'd like to see is a lot more money available, one, for research and education that would enable young people, regardless of where they live, to feel like they can afford to go on and get the kind of education they need. We have lots. I'm struck by some of the stories lately about young people in Iraq and the percentage of those young people who are rural young people. And the points made in the story was that these kids go to the military because they don't think they have any opportunity to go anyplace else. And so I'd like to see money available to students so that higher education is affordable, and every kid, regardless, can count on, I can go get the kind of education I need. And I think when you're talking education, given the rate of change in our society, it isn't just the 18 to 24-year-old anymore that needs that. All of us need to figure out how do you stay current with your profession. And that is especially true in rural areas where you've got to travel. And so I'd like to see us have a lot more money behind that, as well as what kinds of research can we be doing that will create new economic engines in rural areas so that we've got opportunity for people.
Chancellor Christensen, I'm not going to ask if you think more money should be made available for college students. I'm assuming that's a given. That being the case, though, is there a if that were the case? I mean, is that money best directed directly to institutions in rural America, or is tuition or student loan support a better target? I guess if you had a choice between one or the other to try and keep rural students in institutions like UNK and Chadron and the other state colleges.
Clearly, the policy choice is a combination, because you've got to be able to give access. But if you don't have a quality institution and one that is adequately funded, it doesn't matter how much tuition assistance you give. If there's not a good quality institution to go to, it's meaningless, and then they will take those monies and they will go elsewhere. The real goal is to educate them in the state, give them a high quality education, and then keep them in the state, because they realize this is a very good place to live. It's a great place to raise a family, and there's plenty of opportunities here. And that's really what higher education is all about, is providing more opportunities. And that assistance would be there. I want to retreat for just a second back to what we would do. Simple-minded guys like me look at China and see that there are tens of millions of people in China flocking into new cities every day, every year, and they are not living in rural areas. And we have the ability to help them and learn how to feed them and how to take care of their growth needs. They are not looking towards some of the basic fundamental things of life. I think that's a tremendous potential for rural Nebraska, is that connection to China. And we need our higher education students to have a sampling of the Chinese culture, the Chinese needs. And if I could do some federal ag policy, clearly the connection between rural Nebraska and China is where I'd go.
Another question in the room? Boy, bunch of them now. Yeah, right there in the back.
I couldn't agree more with an idea of a rural bill. My name's Scott Blem. I'm the state director for USDA Rural Development.
Very good.
And kind of as a adding on to what you said there, what I'd like to ask is kind of, if we got that dream and we got the additional dollars there, how do we begin to target the delivery a little more specifically? Because it seems like, for the most part, we tend to try to put the money in areas based on these abstract parameters like per capita income or median household income or percentage of population lost over X number of years. And although those all have a place in the story, that doesn't mean it's the best place to invest money. You know, because we certainly have a segment where, you know, maybe they can't be saved. They hate to say that, but they're probably not prepared. We have another segment who's really doing well, and we need to put them on a pedestal and learn from them. And then there's a whole mix in between that are at different levels of preparedness. So how do we deliver the policy so that we're putting it in places, and then 10 years down the road we look back and say, yeah, we made some good investments, and here's how we can measure it the way we did.
Would you like me to? I'm really glad you're here. I've been, and just as a real quick side, I've been really heartened by USDA's message recently, especially through Mike Johann. And, you know, we all know Mike well from Nebraska, obviously. But he's opened up the last 2 or 3 of his conferences talking about the need for rural economic development and the need for it being part of the Farm Bill, a bigger part of the Farm Bill. And that's great. I mean, that's really great news to hear. And we'll see who writes the Farm Bill. It's a great question. And notoriously, it's written by 4 people in a dark room in Congress. So we hope it'll be different this time. We don't know, but we hope it will. And we hope Mike's ideas find some breathing room. What we would like to see, and I say we in the Kellogg Foundation certainly, but a lot of people we work with, is to look at a partnership between state and federal. And the partnership would look at developing a rural committee that is similar to the ag committees and the state legislatures, and looking at then that being one that is grounded enough in their state's issues, where they know where the real issues are, whether it's about rural health in their state or if it's about infrastructure development or whatever it might be. Then look at a block grant kind of a system of federal dollars evolving to states who know best how to spend resources within those states. Some kind of a system that doesn't allow decisions in Washington to be made because we're just frankly a little concerned about the ability of pressure groups to dictate where resource flows out of Washington. We think the closer it gets administered to where the needs are, the more accountable we can be to those tax dollars. I think that's where we would come down on it is where's the partnership that would both identify the need and help in the administration of those dollars.
I want to play devil's advocate with an example. Listening to the radio yesterday, one of the local talk radio guys was ranting about the new round of tourism grants and how a number of them were for local websites, $500 here, $1,500 here for a tourism grant for a website. That community decided on its own this was something that would be very useful. At the same time, somebody else comes along and says, you know, is that really the best use of this state money, and is that really going to generate tourism? As these block grants come in, state or federal level, whatever the counterpart is, does there also need to be somewhere along the line a look at the effectiveness of whether these localities are sometimes making the best choices? And forgive me, I'm sure there are some people out there that are gnashing their teeth at the concept, but I think that at least the concept needs to be raised.
My perspective would be is that there's no silver bullet. There's definitely not one piece, whether it's agritourism or hunting or whatever it might be. My best guess is that the quality of life will be enhanced with developing infrastructure that supports a wide variety of innovation. Broadband is one thing that Sandy and others have mentioned. You know, how do we penetrate those communities, I think, that have proven over the years that they're innovative and creative if they have the right resources to deal with. So I would come down to the point that I don't think that tourism in Nebraska is going to be the one silver bullet. I would doubt that any one place would have that. I'm a person that believes in diversity, and diversity in all segments. And my firm belief is that nothing original or innovative comes out of the middle of anything. It's only around the fringes where differences are allowed to interact that we get creativity. So why wouldn't we be thinking about a very diverse economy and thinking of a whole diverse set of potential possibilities for economic growth and not any one? So I think the accountability has to be how do you bring the best suggestions, the best recommendations to light, grounded in business plans and being authentic about what's possible, and then fund those. But I wouldn't fund the fringe things for the sake of experimentation. I would fund those things that are pretty well proven to work.
I want to get to another one of our questions from that was phoned in. The comment is Nebraska, like many states, experienced tremendous demographic changes, increases in newcomers, immigrants. What steps should rural communities take to ensure full participation of these newcomers in all the services and systems of their communities? Sandy, I'll turn to you first. Has there been an ongoing effort to in these newly diverse communities to incorporate them in some of the rural initiatives that you've been working on?
Yeah, and I think almost every community has a leadership. It's fairly common now for a community to have a leadership activity. Senator Aguilar could tell you a lot about. That's how I think we first met, was when he was involved in the Grand Island leadership activities. Certainly, I think communities right now, one of the things that I'm hearing, and I see Laverne Barrett sitting out here, and he does a lot of training and leadership. I think communities are starting to be concerned about what I would call issues of succession. Who's going to be here to pick up the baton when I'm no longer here? And as people start to look around and realize that in some cases they've lost population, I think there are a lot of opportunities for people to participate. And a lot of times it's a matter of just getting involved. The young man back here wanted to know, how do I get involved with my community when I go back home? I think sometimes it doesn't involve much more than showing up, and you'll probably be recruited. Communities will vary from community to community. Lexington is one I happen to know something about because we put interns in Lexington, and one of the issues that the local chamber expressed to us was a concern that they didn't know how to work with Hispanic businesses and to get them involved. And they asked for a student that could actually speak Spanish and it would help them. Now, unfortunately, our student's only there for the summer, and so they need ongoing support. But I think communities are really pretty smart about knowing what they need, and they're looking for new strategies and resources to help them engage their citizens, and they're recognizing the need to build new leadership.
Senator Aguilar, any good case studies out in central Nebraska of communities that are successfully bringing in the new immigrant populations into local government and into community planning?
Well, as far as into local government, that's a long, hard process. There's other things communities can do to create a more welcoming atmosphere, and one of the main things is allowing the ability for home ownership and some of the minority businesses. I can show you examples in Grand Island of a whole street that basically is all Hispanic businesses at this point in town, and those were vacant buildings up until the time that this entrepreneurship started off, and now all the businesses are full. All those people are paying taxes in the community, and it's just a matter of time before they become involved in local government. We have a small segment of the minority population right now that are seeking public office, school boards, as well as the city council. And I think that's something that has to be expanded upon across the state, because the diversity doesn't just happen in Grand Island and Lexington. There's a lot of small communities that are benefiting from that as well.
I think you hit the mute button, Bill, and you're a great mime out here in Kearney.
Gee, can you hear me now?
Now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. We may have been talking about you behind your back, Chancellor. That's why we hit mute.
We've been doing that for about a half an hour.
Larry Dix from the Nebraska Association of County Officials. Are county governments actively engaged in attempting to bring in representatives of immigrant communities, Hispanics in particular, into not just elected office, but appointed boards, trying to actively solicit participation in the government process?
Well, I can tell you what's going on out in the counties, and when we start talking about diversity and the changing demographics that we see across the state, and Senator Aguilar hit it, it isn't only Lexington and Grand Island. It is in a lot of the smaller communities. We can drive down to Wilbur, Saline County, and Crete, and you can really observe it in that area. Now, as far as soliciting that information and trying to get membership, I think it's more that we are seeing a number of the diversity, the minorities, step forward and say, okay, we are going to run for a county board or for an elected official or serve on a committee. We are seeing that more and more. We are seeing in county government, and we have taken steps to realize that we cannot continue to provide good government the way we always have before. We have to realize that we do have a diverse population. We have to realize that in elections, we're seeing ballots that are printed in multiple languages, driver's licenses. We see that all the time. So it's starting the evolution now. Significantly, another point that I want to make is we've heard a number of people talk about diversity and said, in another generation, the diversity issue and the different languages sort of go away, because once the diverse population comes into our counties and our state, their children start to learn the language and the means of which we communicate. And so the next generation, that issue goes away, and everybody sort of is melded into what we currently see today. But I would tell you, across the state in counties, we are seeing more and more minorities become very active and very involved in the local community and on county and city races.
Dr. Foster, part of the difficulty, I think, is sometimes the sort of the traditional structures in counties and local government. They're a little taken off guard by the new folks in town and the like, and there's simply we don't know how to bring people into the tent. Even if there's a desire, it's, you know, how do you do it? Are there actual resources available to teach government officials and community leaders and nonprofits and the like to bring in new immigrant populations?
So are you asking for a grant?
If the paperwork is here, we're all about raising money.
Well, I think one thing that the 2000 census told us is that we're much more diverse than we ever thought we were. And the premise that we use at the Kellogg Foundation is that the United States right now is the most rapidly changing demographics anywhere in the world. It's happening in the U.S. right now. Immigrant populations, and not just the Hispanic migration north, but the African population, Asian populations. You know, the new farmers of the Northeast are African and Asian, and the new farm population of California is going to be Hispanic and Asian. We're looking at a sea change in the way that our communities are made up, the makeup of our communities, and what make up agriculture in this country. Now, the question will be for us is, are we going to embrace that and take advantage of that and look at that as an asset? Or will we say, well, you know, that's not for us, because we've always been like this and we should always be like this. And obviously, what's going to win out in the long run is that people that are different are going to be in our communities and are going to be solid citizens and assets to the community. So what we've engaged upon is ways that really enhance the leadership of communities to say that there are valuable resources to be capitalized with the differences that are presented to us now. So it's about access. It's about traditional leadership making room for new leadership in a partnering way. It's really about looking at a very different scenario as we go into the future, one that capitalizes on the differences and not discriminates on differences. We've had years and years of that, and we don't need that anymore. So how do we get to the other point of saying, you know, difference is good. You know, difference is good. We need to capitalize on it.
Senator Aguilar, on a very practical level, I'll give you the last word. I'm a county commissioner down in Adams County, and I very much want to increase the participation of my new Hispanic community in the public hearing process. How do I go about it?
There's several media outlets that are, you know, directed to the Hispanic population, and you start at that point. Also through the churches and through the schools, you know, those are great ways to reach that particular population. I think that's necessary, and, you know, offer that open hand to them, and you build it, they will come, so to speak.
Thank you. There are a number of questions in the room. Daniel?
Hi, my name is Danielle Nankis, and we talked a lot tonight about how technology is really a key to success and connectedness for rural Nebraska and rural America. And I wanted to know if maybe the panelists could discuss some of the policy choices around the provision of broadband that we've seen the Nebraska legislature address recently and other states address in recent years.
And I want to make sure we got our definition. When we're talking about broadband, we're just talking about the most accessible high-speed internet access possible and whatever other communication uses we find for it in the future. So, Sandy, this has been part of your soapbox.
Well, I think I'd yield to the current senator who may want to expand on what the legislature did this session, but I think that the biggest discussion underway right now is, and I don't recall the bill number, John Jawerson's back there somewhere, he'll remember it, is the question of who should actually be allowed to provide that service. Should municipalities be allowed to do it? Should, at one time there was discussion about NPPD's infrastructure. And so there's currently a study going on to look at who should be allowed to do that. If you look at what's going on in other states, this is a hot topic all over the country. And some cities are in states where they're not in that debate, but are allowing all kinds of alternatives to go on. There's some interesting experiments going on. I think it's Philadelphia recently that has had lots of attention paid to it, and Google is talking about providing services to San Francisco. So it's an exciting time, and it's very hard to stay on top of all the technological advances. I think my dream would be to make sure that rural America isn't left behind the door as all of this is happening, that we remain open to new technologies and make it possible for us to experiment, because I don't think we've discovered all the perfect ways to provide access to people. Certainly if you drive across the state of Nebraska, a lot of people will tell you, well, just get me a cell phone that works. So we've got not only broadband issues to deal with, but cell phone access as well. But I think you may want to turn to somebody who's actually sitting in the legislature right now if you want to talk about the current bill.
We will turn to somebody sitting in the legislature. Senator Aguilar, are you familiar with the broadband bill, and what would be your stand on it?
I am familiar with it, and there is a lot of problems that goes with it. Sandy kind of framed one of them, whether or not to allow municipalities to take part in that process, and the threat there, what would happen there is we're going to be, if we would allow that, we would be putting some private business out of business. And they're the ones that's out there making the investments right now and trying to expand. So I don't think we want to do something that's going to harm that effort and put them out of business, so they'll quit investing in Nebraska. Some of the other issues is, do we want to allow some of the public service funding to be able to go to wireless communication? Right now it doesn't have the ability to do that, and there's a lot of people think that maybe that's a direction we should go, since some of the wire organizations haven't quite reached clear across Nebraska and provided what they need to provide at this point.
It's interesting.
Bill, I sit on that. Excuse me, Bill. I sit on the LB 865 task force, which is what that legislation created to study this, and our charge is to take a report back to the legislature by the end of 2006, and we're in the process right now of trying to get a good facilitator to frame these issues. And there are about 6 different things for us to look at that the legislature directed us. In the old days, the discussion was cable TV, and for example, municipalities wanted to own their own cable TV companies and the franchises, and today they're so glad that they don't, because that would have been outdated technology. They would have stranded all their resources, and the real balance is, how do you give them the services and yet don't leave them behind? And hopefully that task force will have some decent answers within the next year.
There are some other questions. You've been waiting. Yes, Rachel?
Rachel Rumpel with the Groundwater Foundation. Fairly recently, watersheds in western Nebraska were designated to be over, in some cases, and fully appropriated in others. This will ultimately lead to a reduction in the amount of irrigated agriculture in the west. How would you suggest we mobilize local leaders and economic development folks to see this change as an opportunity rather than a massive threat?
Well, there's a loaded question.
Throwing it out there.
I'll literally toss it out to any of the 4 of you that would want to address it. I can't think of an issue that I haven't heard almost everybody in the rural Nebraska talk about recently.
Well, you could let the guy that's not from Nebraska take it, so it's a little more.
I was hoping.
Well, and the answer is I don't know. But the answer is it represents an opportunity to think out of the box a bit about what is the structure of agriculture, what is the commodity you will grow that may not require the water that an irrigation system provides in the way that it has in the past. You know, it's really interesting. I'm from Iowa, actually, originally, and we look at the hypoxia issue in the Gulf of Mexico, and we find that about 70% of it comes from about 3 or 4 states: in Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, the watershed, the northern watershed going down the Mississippi River. And a lot of it is due to the monoculture that we have in the Midwest. There's a lot of thought being put into is what would be the changes needed to create economic benefit in agriculture, but yet change the structure a bit so that it doesn't contribute to the hypoxia issue in the Mississippi River and the Delta, etc. You know, those are really big, tough issues, because this says, you know, couldn't be business as usual. It would be something different. So to me, it's about how do we put together the thinking and the thought processes that says, if this is not a viable alternative anymore, whether it's availability of water or if it's we're poisoning our oceans, if that's not a viable option anymore, what is the next viable option that does safeguard what we value most? And so to me, yes, it's a critical issue. Water is the golden issue of the future, certainly in Nebraska, the Southwest, in the United States, and around the world. But it's going to force us to think differently about how we do agriculture, for example. So I don't know what the answer is, but I know that we have to embrace it with all of the intellectual and spiritual essence that we have to figure that out.
I might actually take the water issue, probably much to your chagrin, out of your question. Just in general, when there's someone is interested in developing a coalition on an issue in rural areas, almost irregardless of the philosophy or what the issue is, there are real challenges in putting those coalitions together and attempting to develop a grassroots movement in rural America. What types of tools are out there? Actually, the Groundwater Foundation may be one of the better organized outfits in the state right now. There are other people that have even less than that to work with. Where do you start? Regardless of the issue. I'm turning to the out-of-stater again.
I thought you were just asking Rachel.
I'm getting prompted on this.
And I will turn it around. If somebody else were to be starting from scratch on whatever the issue is, what recommendation would you give them? You've got this great foundation with these great networking already in place. What about the person that doesn't have it? What advice would you give them?
I think building on kind of a conversation we just had about diversity and having as many players as you can around the table and finding out, you know, what really motivates them, and whether it's economic development or the environment or alternative, you know, how do I raise my family, the best situation for that, and finding common ground is where we've found, you know, the greatest success to be. That's really challenging when we ask people who, you know, have been successful doing the same thing for many years to change. So that's the struggle that's going on right now. But it's to just get everyone together.
Because I'd like to build on what Rachel said a minute. We've been doing a lot of research about rural development for the last number of years, and one of the things we've found out, we've asked about the perception of rural America, and my opening statement is about a public perception of utopia and dystopia that I mentioned. But the perception of state legislators and federal congressmen and senators is that they are fully aware of what rural issues lie out there. That's their constituency. Of course they know the condition of rural America. But they also feel like no one is holding their feet to the fire. That there can be all kinds of issues brought to their attention, but there's no compelling reason for them to do anything about it, because It is not so politically sensitive, and there's no advocates and champions for rural America like there might be for segments of the other segments of the economy. So they will blatantly say, you know, yeah, I know what's going on, but I don't have to do anything about it. So when we think about how do you gain coalition, how do you build the kinds of advocacy and voice for rural America that someone will listen to, it takes somewhat what Sandy said earlier. It takes us getting together and getting beyond our own separate issue to something for the greater good. And so if my issue is groundwater, I have to also know that that affects the economic development, the health, the public health, and the education of all of my rural communities. And I have to be a little less selfish about getting my specific policy agenda addressed and more open to a common agenda that integrates all those things. And it's only with that common voice that we're going to be able to make any progress at all when we don't have the kind of pressure groups and advocacy that other lobbyists do.
We're still taking questions at 1-800-332-0265, and make sure you mention the public policy as the code when they ask you. Other questions in the room? Do you have the blue shirt back there?
John Jordison, I represent Great Plains Communications, and I just felt, since Sandy mentioned my name, I wanted to address the broadband issue. My company provides telecommunications and internet services to 77 towns across Nebraska, none of which have a stoplight. So we really represent rural Nebraska in terms of small community. I just wanted to say I'm pleased that my company and a coalition of other private providers, and I'm not making a plug, but it is good news. This coalition now, since June, has provided high-speed internet via satellite anywhere in Nebraska. It is, and I know Sandy's been involved in surveys that say, well, we've got 79% or 83% access to high-speed internet and broadband. That really today is up to 100%. And it's important not from my company or any company standpoint, but it's important for Nebraskans and small communities all across the state that they have this tool for economic and community development.
Thank you for joining us. The gentleman in the blue turtleneck here has had a question here for some time. Yes, sir.
My name is Howard Otteson. I'm not representing anybody, but I'm a emeritus of the University of Nebraska. I'd like to turn the discussion over to the question of rural public services. You know, we have a relatively small population, one of the smaller states in the country, and we have, if not the greatest number of counties, very, very close to the greatest number of counties in the country. I'm wondering if what attention we're paying to the costs of rural public services. I'm thinking particularly of it at the county level because I know that the variation in the cost per capita between the counties is very, very great. But I don't hear much discussion about this issue.
I believe you're going to shortly. Senator Aguilar, I'm going to bring you back into the discussion. Isn't the legislature looking at county service cost issues and perhaps even consolidation issues in the coming session?
I'm sure they are. The government committee under the leadership of Diana Shemick has been well aware of those issues, and they've been on the table now for, I think, over a year now, trying to put something together that they can put on the floor of the legislature and have an intelligent debate with.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there a need for a real serious look at local governments cooperating more in providing these services?
Yes.
You've been sitting with Chancellor Christensen too long.
Oh, he's been my role model for a long time. Straight guy, really not.
Dr. Foster, is the cost of services and the sometimes the inability of local governments to really come to terms with this issue, is that holding back some rural development?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's the cost of services holding back rural development. But I do think that it's holding back the ability of the of governance, whether it's the township level, county level, and the overlap of jurisdictions. I think that tends to hold back where these efforts are and who has some authority into approving development plans, business plans, zoning ordinances, those sorts of things. So you know, I come from right now the state of Michigan, and there are something like 1,440 different jurisdictional authorities in that state. And try to get anything, you know, through a township or a county, because every one of them has authority. Now, is there a need for consolidation? Yes. But it's consolidation, in my perspective, around leadership and development perspective and development planning. Will that lead to other consolidations? Yes, it will. And I think it would be more efficient in any case. I think each state is individual. I don't really know the structure in Nebraska as well as I should. But right now, what we're finding in tribal communities that are affiliated with U.S. government entities, et cetera, or states like Michigan, there's such an overlap of service that it actually does get in the way of development. We've got to figure out how to work better together.
Bill?
I think Nebraska, Bill.
One second, Chancellor.
It's my perception that it may well depend on Nebraska, kind of where you are. I think, and Larry Dix would probably be better at knowing actually what's going on than I, but it's my sense that we have seen interlocal agreements occur because we've had some pretty tight spending lists on local governments in Nebraska. And so that has driven some interlocal agreements. I know that's the case in the Panhandle. And so that has, but that wouldn't apply all for what we may see in the counties that are dominated by metropolitan areas. So that you really can't. I don't think I can make a blanket statement that would apply to all parts of the state. So it's kind of depends on where you're looking. I don't know if Larry wants to comment on that or not after Senator Christian or Chancellor Christensen.
Now let's go to Carney.
I think this is really a crucial question because it goes back to the fundamental purpose of tonight's meeting, and that's rural leadership. The focus, and when I spoke earlier about don't let numbers define what we do in rural Nebraska by definitions, this is a classic case. We ought to be focused on what the quality of that leadership is in those counties, and if that requires us to do some consolidation to improve the quality, then so be it. The real issue is a number of our leaders and people who are going to become spokespersons across the state, whether it's elected office or it's a variety of organizations, are going to have experience at the county government level. They probably also will have some experience at the school board level. Local levels, that's where they get their start with public service. As we begin to strangle the counties and we put on spending limitations, they have more pressures, more duties, those duties become more difficult, you really dilute their ability to grow and to prosper and to be good leaders because they're so busy fighting for survival they can't look ahead. And Larry and I have talked on occasion about raising the quality of the person who serves as county officials, and that means access to better training, better education, and perhaps it means in some cases that you're going to have to combine some of those counties to be able to use the money to attract quality people, to train them. You're going to have to spend some money on them. And I used to joke with Jerry Warner that we could consolidate counties in this state very easily. It only costs us about $300,000, and that's for enough cement to go plaster over all the names of the counties that are embedded in granite around the Capitol. We can't even change license plates numbers without invoking a holy war. And so until we can get over those issues, we've got some real troubles, and that's the problem with rural leadership. Is that it's incumbent upon those of us in rural Nebraska to put aside some of our differences for what we think make us better, and that includes our leadership capability and where we train those people. And this is a crucial question. It's a great policy thing to talk about.
Well said.
Larry Dix may be sorry that he just didn't stay home and watch TV tonight. But
There had to be something good on. Well, certainly, you know, and I think what Chancellor Christensen and he and I have had these discussions, and it is about good leadership and developing that. And I believe there is a misconception out there of the fact that Nebraska has 93 counties, and if we would have less, we would have more money. And let me explain why I don't believe that to be the case. And also let me tell you what is going on out there. If you look at county government and you look at the large budget items in county government, rural Nebraska, I don't care what county you go to, the highest expense is county roads, bar none. Maintenance of county roads, guaranteed. The second highest is law enforcement, and the third highest is your court system. Now, you can put as many counties together as you want, and until you start closing down roads, and then you start shutting down the economy of rural America, you're not going to take away, and you're not going to see that large of a savings. Until you take away some of the law enforcement duties that and the areas that they need to patrol, it's going to start to say that you can't really go out there and save money simply by taking 93 counties and making them 47. Kansas has 105 counties. Iowa, where you're from, you know, Texas, for heaven's sakes, we know how big it is. It has 273 counties. But what you'll see historically in the way the United States evolved, once you get west of Nebraska, you have fewer counties. You go to Arizona, they have 13 counties. Land mass similar in size. Now granted, it's 400 miles from one end of the county to the other, and a majority of it is public land. But it's an interesting debate, and as we've had that debate, I've said many times, if we were to start over today and redraw Nebraska, we probably wouldn't draw it with 93 counties. But we probably also wouldn't put the state capital in Lincoln either. So there's a lot of things. If we could go back and do it again, we'd probably do it different. But what is happening... Is that
a negotiating point? We'll consolidate if you move the capital.
The chancellor would like to see the capital in Kearney, center of the state. But what is happening, and Sandy alluded to it, is interlocal agreements and agreements among different levels of government. We are seeing more and more where we no longer have a town marshal, a city policeman, but we have the county's sheriff's department overseeing law enforcement for even the little small towns. We are seeing interlocal agreements in the area of communication and dispatching for E911 calls. We are seeing 4 and 5 counties going together and creating a communication system with their law enforcement so they can communicate across county lines. So while we're not really going out there and marking off the county line and saying, you know, that line is no longer forever drawn in the sand, we are taking down the barriers that say things stop at the county lines, especially communications and things like that. So we are seeing, and I think over time, over evolution, it will probably take care of itself rather than saying, what is the magical number of counties that we need in the state of Nebraska?
Just before we started this discussion, I got this question. It's interesting because I don't think many people consider this a rural development issue, but it really is. The EMS system, emergency medical services system in Nebraska is at best fragmented, according to the questioner. What proposals are available to build the infrastructure and develop capacity to ensure a quality EMS service? This really is at the heart of protecting a lot of rural communities, both volunteer fire departments and emergency medical services. What can be done in individual communities as a matter of policy to see that these services continue to be offered and coordinated?
Yeah. And obviously I can't speak for Nebraska, and so someone else can do that. What we're seeing are these issues around the country. You know, as we look at an infrastructure in rural America that has to make critical decisions, and many of the times the decisions are not to invest in some of these, what we would think is very essential services like health care and EMS and fire protection. This is where, again, I would say that These are your essential parts of what makes quality of life and the secure safety net for people all over the country important. So the question is why shouldn't we have these? Why would we consider not having them? And then I come back with is, where is the kind of investment in rural America that allows these things to be there? So there's one piece of it is it's fragmented, but I would ask the question, why is it fragmented? Probably because there's been a lack of infrastructure investment in rural Nebraska, in rural Iowa, in all the rural states across the country, much of it led by competition for federal dollars, et cetera. And again, it's a policy question. If we want that to be there, then we need a different policy. So I don't know the answer to how we make it happen, but I know that it is not altogether about fragmentation. It's about somebody's made choices that those are not as important as something else.
Senator Aguilar, is there more the state can be doing to support emergency medical services in the state of Nebraska?
Well, right now there's more going on than what I think a lot of people are aware of. For one thing, the ability for first responders to be able to communicate with each other, that's happening real fast here in central Nebraska. And I'm not just talking about Grand Island, I'm talking about many counties around Hall County and an expanded area. And that area is expanding almost daily. And it's just a matter of time before the entire state will be able to communicate when it comes to not just first responders, but I mean, we're talking tow trucks, we're talking National Guard, anybody that would be in an emergency response scenario should be able to communicate with each other. And that's one thing that's being worked on and will happen soon across Nebraska.
Other questions? I know there have been a couple. Jeremy, another one?
I'm Jeremy Steele. Museum Systems here in Nebraska, and also representing one from Arnold, Nebraska, right in the middle of the state. And I think that's a prime place to try some new things as far as education. But also, I wanted to touch on rural health and the area, the overall atmosphere that's going on is struggling farmers, and the transition that has to occur when change comes through family farm or loss of family farm. There is issues such as depression, anxiety, and these things are so important. And in rural areas, it takes an hour to travel to where you want to get some help for that. And when you need that help, you're going to do whatever you can not to go get that. So I mean, I can say this from experience. I mean, we lost a farm, and I had to go through 3 years of depression and anxiety and all this stuff. So I am inspired to either do something for rural Nebraska so that the farmers that do not have a choice but to change can change and can get the help that they need and not be ashamed that they are going through the grieving process and the anxiety and depression that comes along with it, because that's going to happen. And I think it's so key that Nebraska steps forward and says, this is an issue, and this is a concern, and we need to get that out. And farmers and family members need to know that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just something that does occur. It can be, for example, for me it's probably a 5-year process, but it could be a 5-month process for some people if they just, I wish in my life I would have said, you know what, I got to go through this process, and I have to sit down and talk to people, but rather than being a 5-month process, it was a 5-year process. So I just really think that that's something where Nebraska could really step ahead and be leaders across the nation, saying, you know, mental health is a concern, and it's an issue that we can really move forward on and just say, we want to provide service for rural Nebraska because that's what's needed. Here in Lincoln, I can go talk to some people and no one would know, and it's really confidential. But when you're in a small town, your neighbors know, and you don't want your neighbors to know. But you have to go through this stuff. So I was just wondering, I know I went on and on, but still, I think this is key.
I think as part of the rural initiatives, Med Center has been, you've at least incorporated part of what they do in the rural initiatives more broadly in health services in general, but within mental health, is that true?
I wouldn't, We have not addressed that area specifically under the rural initiative, but I certainly agree with you, Jeremy, that there's certainly a need for these kinds of services. Public policy center is involved in that through the university. The Med Center does a certain amount of work now where people can actually access services using distance technology, which may be a solution down the road. I thought you were going in a different direction when you started out, and I can't resist also commenting on the point you made in general about health and the need for access to health care. And lately I've sort of taken advantage of any public stump that I can get on to encourage all of us that one of the things we're going to have to think about is what are we going to do about the rising cost of health care and come up with creative solutions and really look at all of those things. It's farmers, it's ranchers, it's small business people, it's universities, it's state government who is now finding out their costs are going up 22%. It's corporations who are saying healthcare costs are killing me. I think that is one of the greatest issues confronting us as a nation is how are we going to be able to afford healthcare, quality healthcare, whether it be mental health care or other kinds, at a time when the costs are growing rapidly and we have an aging population. So I'm glad you brought that up because it's an issue that I don't know the answer to. If I did, I'd be out being either a high-paid lobbyist or consultant on how to solve that. But it's something that, talk about something we all need to get together on and work for policy solutions. That's certainly one.
Chancellor Christensen, are you seeing greater interest in the hospitals in the Tri-Cities out there in doing rural health care outreach and trying to get services into the communities? And is there more that can be done?
There clearly is an emphasis on access to health care in rural Nebraska, and I think that you'll see particularly St. Francis and Grand Island and Good Samaritan and Kearney are very active in the telehealth medicine areas. And so the concept, if I was in Arnold, Nebraska, and I wanted to go talk to somebody and it was a matter of, let's say, some counseling or so on, they really can hook you up in a very private, very confidential manner and receive expert services from some of the best people in the world. They don't have to be in the same room. You can do it in your own hometown.
Exactly like this.
Yeah, it's just like this. And maybe you're giving Senator Aguilar and I mental health counseling this evening, but we're very much in tune here that access is something that ought to be generally accepted. We ought to have decent roads, we ought to have decent communications, and we ought to have good health care. And those are the fundamental things to be able to survive and live a fulfilling life in rural Nebraska. We're not going to have a hospital in every small town. We can't afford it. We can't recruit the physicians. We can't keep the quality. And so we're going to have quality centers. And for example, in Good Sam, the average patient here travels 90 miles to come to this hospital. And that's an unbelievable figure when you figure they travel 90 miles one way to come.
We're running out of time, but I want to give each of our participants an opportunity for a closing statement, if you will. We've heard a number of issues addressed, from groundwater to health care and governmental services. In general, I'm recognizing we're probably preaching to the choir tonight with the folks both in this room and around the state. But with each of you, I'm curious if there is a piece of advice that you would give our audiences here to take back to their communities or their organizations in what can be done to perhaps reconsider the development of rural communities around the state. And I'll start with Senator Aguilar, if I could.
Okay, thank you. I guess what I would say, what to take back is make sure the leaders are aware of some of the most important key factors that it takes to grow that community. And we just finished talking about one of them, that's medical access, also highway access. You know, those are things that that can be done. You know, we have to keep pushing forward on that. And as far as the hospitals and medicine, telehealth and telemedicine has expanded so much over the last few years. There's hub hospitals throughout the state of Nebraska that continue to expand their services to try to reach every medical facility they can. And as Doug had said, that we're not going to have hospitals everywhere, but we can have a health center where people can go and get counseling, mental health counseling, from some of the experts in the big cities, because quite frankly, even in the big cities of Nebraska, we don't have enough mental health practitioners. That is a problem throughout the state that we, as a state, need to be thinking about and trying to increase participation in that field.
Thank you, Senator. Sandy Schofield, the Rural Initiative of University of Nebraska, your advice to the true believers.
Well, I think that the main thing that all of us that are concerned about rural policies and policy issues have to do is to start talking to each other and try to figure out what kinds of things can we coalesce around that we can agree to champion together. It's very easy, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody, but when I think about my town of Shadron, I know what I think I want for Shadron. Shadron probably isn't going to be able to generate the votes it takes to get it. And it's true throughout the state, it's true throughout the nation. And so I think we need to start to find some things that we can agree on. This is an issue of critical importance that we can all agree on is important to our communities. Sometimes I think rural groups come in and are very fragmented, and when they talk to legislators, they either leave kind of a confused and diffused message, or else you simply don't have enough numbers generated to actually muster the kind of support you might want. So I think it's incumbent on everybody in rural leadership first to know what you need and what your issues are in your community, but then you've got to reach out and build coalitions to get anywhere. And that coalition shouldn't stop at the next town over or even the next county over. It's really got to be rural and urban together. There's an old saying about even the dumbest politician can count. And so you've really got to get to a place where you can muster in Nebraska 25 votes. And for us to do that in rural Nebraska, it's going to take some urban votes to get those things done.
From the University of Nebraska-Kearney, Chancellor Doug Christensen, closing comments.
Thank you. I think I'd like to take off on where Sandy left off, and that is that people in rural Nebraska, we need to do a couple of things. One is we've got to face reality. Too often we spend a lot of our time fighting yesterday's battles, and quite frankly, yesterday doesn't matter. We've got to put some of those things behind us and move on. And I'm not sure that every answer does lie in the state capitol, and quite frankly, state budgets and state revenues will continue to trend. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to look to Washington or Lincoln to solve all of our problems, and we're going to probably have to solve our own problems and try to grow some of our own skills and abilities to do that. I think the key to that obviously is education, and the future leadership of this state, I think, is for people to step forward, and rural Nebraska has got to be more aggressive. We need to not sit back and say, well, it doesn't affect us. Well, every state issue does affect us. And all too often we become disengaged because it's somebody else's fight. And showing up is extremely important, and being armed with facts and some vision is crucial for us all. And things like tonight, I think, help do that.
Rick Foster with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation out of Battle Creek. We very much appreciate, first of all, you taking the time to join us this evening. Closing comments.
Well, I also want to thank you and others for having me here. I spent from 1983 to 1992 as a professor at the University of Nebraska, and it's coming home when I come back here. And it's also a place where the Kellogg Foundation has decided over the years to invest, and we invest heavily in the state of Nebraska, and for a couple of good reasons. The people in Nebraska are as authentic as they come, and what they say they will do, they do. And the innovation that comes out of your communities, rural or urban, is critical to the well-being of all rural America. So people look to your state. And so I just want to thank you for that and compliment you for that. I'd like to leave one policy target for you, and I'd like to leave a suggestion about leadership, if I could. The policy target that I would like to see addressed most across the country, but certainly in Nebraska, but across the country, is the resources that are appropriated for industrial recruitment. The recruitment of industry, of jobs, et cetera, that come into your state or other states from usually outside sources. It's $50 billion nationwide in state budgets to recruit. But yet, we know that 90% of the small business, of the jobs that are created by small businesses. So how do we kind of balance? How do we take some of that resource? In Nebraska, it's about $90 million a year. How do we take some of that recruitment dollars and say, how do we invest in micro enterprise, in rural entrepreneurship, in building the small businesses that are appropriate to the size of the communities in which that innovation exists? How do we create balance in the way that we think of strategies for economic development? One way is to set aside resources that have already been appropriated for something else that sometimes we don't get the value out of, for something that is more proven over the country to be successful. So we need to investigate what that means. The second is about leadership, and I would agree with everything my colleagues on the panel have said. It is about leadership, and it's about stepping up. But the one piece that I would like to add is about youth. The youth in Nebraska, I mean, look at all of the data for some of the most intelligent kids graduating from high schools anywhere in the country, in the top 4 or 5 states in doing that. And the kids that I've talked to in Stewart and Atkinson want to come back to their rural homes. They want to come back, and they're already talking as graduating seniors what businesses they would like to participate in when they come back. Now, how did they get that spirit of entrepreneurship themselves in a participation? Well, they got it because adults let them into the topic, into the discussion. They are highly capable, highly qualified to lead our state, this state, and others if we give them the opportunity. And they will come back to our communities if they see that there's an alternative, viable alternative to do that. So I would just like to plead with you. You know, when you think of leadership, boy, don't leave out the greatest asset that is in all of our communities, and that's the innovation and creativity that our youth.
I believe we have 20 or 30 students out in Curtis who are with us this evening, listening to us. So, message well taken. Just a couple very quick items before we leave. First, you've heard again and again, and before we talked, that big piece of advice is don't be afraid to get in contact with people who can answer your questions. This applies to each of the people who have joined us this evening. You can locate the University of Nebraska Rural Initiative online. Literally, just go to any of the search engines and type in Rural Initiative Nebraska. They always show up right at the top of the list. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation has a very rich website with lots of resource materials on it. Senator Aguilar and any of the other state senators can be contacted by email or phone. That's what their staffs are there for. I think we can safely say that the congressional delegations, Mr. Hagel, Mr. Nelson, and each of our 3 congressional representatives have people standing by to take your phone calls, and they welcome them. And finally, we talked about extension earlier. The extension offices around the state are working on these economic development issues literally every day, and they'd love the chance to answer your questions and hook you up with experts. Thanks to our great panel here in Lincoln and in Kearney. My compliments to my colleagues here at NET who provided both the facilities and made the technology work. And finally, the group who brought all of this together, the Public Policy Center of the University of Nebraska, Alan Tompkins, their head, and the Thomas C. Sorensen Public Policy Seminar Series deserve your thanks and appreciation as well. My name is Bill Kelly with NET Television News. Thank you all around the state for participating this evening. Thanks very much.